Hi. Wow. I mean, how good was that? Didn't I tell you that Audrey was going to be fantastic? Well, and obviously Amika, and I'm so excited because Amika is actually going to join the next panel, which I'm chairing. So we're going to have the next panel with three incredible trailblazers, women powerhouses, and there is going to be a chance for a Q&A session as well. So please keep your questions coming in the chat box, and you can obviously also join the discussion on social media using the hashtag #SheInspiresMeLive and tagging us on @WomenForWomenUK. So may I ask the panel to join me?
Hey. Hi.
Oh my God. Oh, literally, my heart is going at 50 miles an hour because I'm so excited to see you. I really am, honestly. You three, you are, I just think you're fantastic. Can I just say, you really are very, very special. And I want to thank you for saying yes. I think one thing that we don't often enough maybe do is that when somebody asks you, can you help me? I'm going to say yes, because wonderful things happen. And so when I reached out to the three of you, hoping, dreaming that you would say yes, because I thought this panel is going to be a firecracker. And you all said yes. I'm like, okay, we're done. This is going to be amazing. So let me introduce you. So this is Martha. And Martha is fundraising. Hi, Martha.
Hi.
So Martha is a fundraising consultant and a writer and campaigner, most importantly. She's a founder member of #CharitySoWhite, a campaign group dedicated to combating institutional racism within the UK charity sector. Super, super important work. And thank you. Soraya, oh my God, Soraya, I haven't seen you in such a long time. It's so lovely to see you. So I've got a long blurb here, but I just thought to myself, I'm going to give my introduction to Soraya. So Soraya is a fierce feminist. Yay!
Yay!
Yay! And importantly, I mean, there's loads of stuff that Soraya has done. So just follow her on social media and find out more. But she's written the most phenomenal book called Rage Becomes Her, The Power of Women's Anger. It literally revolutionized my life, and I told her that. I saw her at a panel in Germany, of all places.
A year ago this week.
A year ago, exactly. That's right. It's just such a phenomenal book, and it just really, really, really helped me. Also helped me with my two daughters, who are 17 and 19, and just kind of thinking through how we grow up suppressing anger. But anyway, we'll come to that. And lastly, but definitely not least, Amika. Hello, Amika.
Hey, hi.
So you all just saw what Amika has done. So she needs no further introduction, which is wonderful. So today we are going to talk about exactly how to stand up, how to speak out, how to take action in order to change the world in a way that we want. And, who better to be on this panel? So we have heard from some incredible women already today, and right at the beginning, Zainab and Annie Lennox were speaking about their kind of view for the world and what can be done. And Annie talked about this kind of aha moment. That so many of the people she knows who are activists have had this aha moment, this kind of trigger moment where they said, "Okay, enough is enough." So I wanted to ask you three, kind of, what was your particular moment? Was there a particular moment? And if so, what was your catalyst for your activism? Can I maybe go first to Martha?
Oh God, I feel like there's been so many moments. It's been a culmination of moments, I think. When I was 11 and I was in maybe like 10, 11, I was in primary school. And I think children have a really strong sense of injustice, right? That this isn't fair, blah, 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 blah. Normally they're wrong. But I feel like I had a particularly strong sense of injustice. And I just didn't like the fact that I had to wear a skirt to school. I couldn't do the kind of dances I wanted on the playground with my friends. I couldn't do cartwheels without people saying I was unladylike. So I campaigned to wear trousers when I was in year 6. So I didn't actually get the benefits of it because I did win, but I got to wear trousers for about 3 weeks. But I see children from my primary school now wearing trousers, and I think that was one of those moments. I grew up in Tottenham, which is where the London riots happened in 2011. Because of the shooting of Mark Duggan and wider, systemic issues of inequality. So I've always been around people who have not been able to fully participate in society. I went to school with people who have been to prison, who have died because of the inequalities in our society. So I've always wanted to be part of that change, and I have that I guess energy to do it.
Yes, you do.
Those are my beginnings.
I love it. Do you know what? I actually think this sense of injustice that we have when we are younger is mostly right. I actually think that's definitely how it started with me. But what about you, Soraya? Was there like a specific moment?
It's funny because I think you and I even talked about having this sense of injustice as young girls. And I totally agree with Martha. I grew up in a country that hadn't yet gone through independence in the British Commonwealth. And so was quite attuned to what was happening around me as a young child. And it's arresting. Some of my earliest memories are the most arresting scenes of feeling that this is wrong, something is really wrong. But then, and it's interesting, I have a playground scene in my head as well about dancing. It's
really
so cute because we used to do a playground dance called Brown Girl in the Ring. And the ring, and people went around the ring, and then they chose someone, and they had to dance in front of that person. And the older I got, the harder it was to be free in that space because there was so much policing of our bodies and our clothes, and it just became, instead of joyful, really uncomfortable. So I completely agree with both of you. Very young, very strong sense of injustice that needed to be corrected. But I think I was a really typical firstborn kind of good girl, and I thought that there's something wrong with me, right? I need to think about this, or I need to study this. And so I did all of that. I really studied hard, and I thought really hard, and I just kept adapting to things. And I will say that it wasn't until I had 3 daughters, and they were very young, and I had one particular moment when one of them, who looked older than she was and taller and bigger, and she wanted to go do something by herself. And I had a real moment of what I thought was panic and anxiety, but then I realized was like this blinding rage, because I didn't want to teach her all the things that I had been taught, and I resented being expected to. That was my moment. Then I was like, no one else is interested in changing this the way I am at this exact moment, and I'm going to take any energy I have, any thinking I have, any resources I have to fight back. And just, that was it. I'm like, that was it. And that is the moment that I became an activist, I think. Yeah.
Well, thank you. Thank you for that moment, honestly, because you have made this world, honestly, a more fierce place.
Well, all of you. I mean, it's just such a delight to actually talk to people about doing this.
Right? Kind of grabbing it and using that outrage. And Amika, I mean, that clearly, you spoke actually in the video a little bit, but, just elaborate a bit, what was it for you to see?
Yeah, for sure. Thank you so much for having me, and it's really a real honor to be with both of you guys. You're both huge inspirations to me. And I also apologize that if I massively repeat everything I just said in that video.
Yeah.
But yeah, so my kind of moment was at the beginning of 2017, when I was at school and doing my A-levels, and I think I was very kind of, tunnel vision, like these were the things that were important in my life, getting my education, seeing my friends on the weekend. My life was pretty, easy and monotonous. And then I did have a real kind of catalyst moment when I was just one morning before school on my phone, and an article popped up that said that girls in the UK my age, or sometimes as young as 9 or 10 years old, were missing school for a week every month because they couldn't afford pads and tampons. And I'm so lucky and privileged to have never been in that situation. but just reading that some girls were literally on my doorstep in the United Kingdom, where I think we all like to think that there's no such thing as poverty and we're all fine, and that's something that happens in like the third world, that kind of expression. So for me, it was a real shock that this was happening here. And then the more I looked into it, I became even more shocked and even more angry that it was being raised in Parliament. It was all over the press because it shocked so many people. But the British government were just kind of covering their ears to it. Nobody wanted to talk about it. The Education Secretary at the time kind of refused to answer a question when it was raised in Parliament. And all these little catalysts kind of contributed to my rage, as you've said. And growing up on my phone and on social media, always kind of on Instagram and Twitter, it just seems so natural to talk about this online. So I put it on online, and I started a petition, and I realized it was just picking up speed. It was picking up momentum really fast. And I think so many people were as outraged as I was about the existence of period poverty in the UK. So yeah, that's how it started. I think when I started it, I was quite naive and thinking that we'd get loads of petitions and then it would just happen and there'd be tampons flying around everywhere. But it was not that easy at all. It took 2.5 years of very hard work whilst I was at school, kind of writing articles and doing interviews, and we did a big protest outside Downing Street, as I mentioned, which was amazing, but it was still really disappointing when the government ignored our cries for change, even after 2,000 young people physically went to Downing Street. We then did a legal campaign to try and say the government was kind of legally obliged to do this under the Equality Act, because it says that all children should have equal access to education. So we said, under that rule, surely this has to happen. And then finally, at the beginning of 2019, the Chancellor made a statement saying that it will happen. So from early 2020, all schools and colleges in England can order in free pads, tampons, and period products according to their need. So
it's incredible. Amika, in fact, you have already answered my next question, which is fantastic. No, this is really great. I thought you would, because it's natural, right? To talk like what has catalyzed you into then what were the first steps that you took. And I love how when you talk about it, it's always about taking the first step, actually, and you, so it's the outrage, and it's then about taking the first step, and you don't know, obviously, what's going to happen, how long it's going to take, and because no one does, right? This is like this illusion that somehow you can plan a campaign. I mean, you can't really, right? You just got to take the first step, and I'm really interested in that. So we've heard from Amika, and Martha, what about you? And you can either, you can do the campaign around getting trousers, or obviously any other campaign you've been involved in. But what's the first steps that you've taken?
So in terms of Charity So Why, just to give a bit of context, we are a campaigning group where our aim is to get the charity sector to take the lead in rooting out racism in the UK, by leaders rooting out racism in their own organisations. The charity sector is not immune from racism. In fact, it perpetuates it in quite a terrifying way. So we it all started from seizing the moment, I guess. And that's what we've seen as well in COVID-19, seizing the moment and finding the opportune moment to kind of like get yourself out there. So one of the founding members, Fatima, came across some training, some racist training from Citizens Advice, which is a pretty powerful and long-standing institution in the UK, talking about interacting with communities of colour. And there were loads of racist stereotypes in it, right? Saying things like expect low levels of literacy, a distrust of authorities, just things that just aren't true. So she tweeted it, and she galvanized people of color to tweet about their own experiences of racism in the charity sector using the hashtag Charity So White. So like Amika was saying, mobilizing kind of that social media. So we kind of thought, actually, it's not just about us as a group, it's about all of the people of color in the charity sector. We're trying to mobilize power, because individually people of color in the charity sector don't have any power, but together we have a lot, and mobilizing it around lived experience. So we had, in the first day of the campaign, we collected 3,000 tweets from people of color talking about their experiences of racism using that hashtag. And you can't ignore something like that. So having those testimonies and that kind of like bank of lived experience, not data, tweets, stories, quotes about real life experiences, that was somewhere that was a really good starting place, because then nobody could ignore us. Being really clear about our mission, our values, and our call to action. We're all about, you know, looking at the world as it should be, and really focusing on that very kind of future building mission, keeping it quite broad, talking about honesty, humility, and hope as our values. So when we were really clear on that, it helped us to kind of keep bringing it back, because there's a lot has happened. There's been a lot of racism in the UK, if people haven't noticed. So it's easy to get lost in doing lots of different things and trying to respond to everything. So being really clear about like what our mission is, and focusing on our networks. Like I said, we're mobilizing people of color. We won't be a successful campaign if we're not out there building those connections, drawing on the campaigners of the past as well, and making sure that we're connecting the dots so that we become an unstoppable force rather than working on our own.
Yeah, thank you. That's I really love how specific you've made that and practical. So, because that's really our aim, you know, that our audience can get inspiration, but also really practical tips for taking action. Soraya, what about you?
So I think the first thing I started doing was questioning and talking to people, particularly in institutions, because I thought that one of the assumptions in our lives was that the violence that women encounter is just natural, part of life, part of society. We have to learn to adapt to it as individuals, etc. And people don't want to talk about it. They don't really want to talk about rape. They don't want to talk about intimate partner violence. They don't want to talk about state violence against women that is popularized in these ways. And so I started writing, because it was something I personally could do to engage other people at a bigger scale than just intimate conversations. But when I started writing, the thing that happened was an immense amount of hostility online. There was community, but there was really virulent and violent response to the idea that a woman would stand up and say, this is wrong. We have a social and political responsibility to address it as a society. And so when I realized how much sort of threatening content was being proliferated against women like me, I did what Martha described, which is I reached out to other women all over the world. And as I was writing, women also reached out to me. Because, in fact, the work that we do, even though we do it across great difference, all kinds of differences, there are some consistent threads. And one of those is the need for community and adaptation, right? Like what I encounter in Washington, D.C. is going to be different from what you encounter in London. But we do have some similarities that we can use and leverage together as a community. And so even though the horrible kind of badness of the internet can come into any of our doors, we can also leverage it for immense connection and power. So working with a woman named Jacqueline Friedman here in the United States, she was the executive director of Women Action in the Media, and with Laura Bates in England, the three of us formed a coalition that was expressly designed to confront Facebook in particular, because at the time, which was 2011, which was also a global catalytic moment for several reasons in terms of violence against women. But at the time, Facebook's attitude towards rape proliferated pages, so rape jokes, pages that literally made it humorous or that threatened women with that kind of violence, and also domestic violence, were tolerated as free speech and as not their problem. They put a little parenthetical on it, controversial humor. And when it didn't really work to try and negotiate with them, which we did for about 9 months, we bypassed them and we started a global campaign that went directly to their advertisers. And that happens, I think, a lot more now. I will say that in 2012, that didn't happen very often at this scale. And so we were able to get 100 women's rights organizations that work at the nexus of violence, technology, and gender-based rights to sign on. And the campaign threatened many, many millions of dollars in about a day. And that got attention. I will say that money does get attention, despite the best intentions to try and work cooperatively with organizations in a capitalist system. Money will always get more attention. But that campaign meant that we were able to then get in the door, bring women from all over the world working on the ground at local levels into direct communication with people at Facebook to work on translating guidelines and building escalation channels, because so much of what was happening, it was happening in social media. And subsequently, while I continued to write, a lot of the work that I've done has been on freedom of expression for women activists and for journalists and politicians, all of whom face disproportionately high levels of violence online that obviously has behind it the threat of real violence. This is what people seem not to, they seem to unwilling to really consider, that it has emotional resonance for us because of our experience of trying to avoid violence all the time.
Yeah.
So the connection is very important, and using the technology as much as you can.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, thank you so much. There's so many questions formulated in my mind, but I also already am getting questions from the audience. But before we turn to those questions, I would like to ask you to kind of dig a little bit into the challenges, because I think what is likely to happen, and it happens to me, I sometimes hear amazing women like you speak about it, right? And I think, this is just incredible. And no matter how much you break it down into, small steps, it's still like a huge deal. And it still seems to me like, how can I, there's no way I can do that, right? And so I just wondered whether you can talk a little bit about the challenges you face, but in a way in which what advice would you give to yourself if you were starting all over again? I'm again just looking for something really practical to inspire and support our audience today. Let me start with Amika.
Yeah, I think that's a great question, because especially kind of recently, the conversation around activism can sometimes be kind of simplified in that everyone says, activism is great, social media activism is great, and no one talks about the fact that it's actually really hard. It's actually a huge kind of emotional strain, especially if the work that you're doing comes from your own lived experience, or even if it doesn't. I think just talking about these things and the frustration of being so convinced by a certain injustice, but having the person that you're trying to convince just completely ignore you, or people denying what you're saying or belittling your work, I think can be really disheartening. So I think it's really important that we're talking about the challenges. For me personally, my main challenge was kind of balancing it when I was at school. I think it's impossible pretty much to have activism as kind of a full-time job. It doesn't often pay, it doesn't often it doesn't often work as like a full-time thing. So many people I know who are activists are also holding down jobs. So the time constraint is a huge thing that I think we need to talk about more, and also the support system that you really need. I think you can't do this work without moral support from the people in your life, and even people online who are doing similar work or doing activism, just kind of getting that assurance and that that kind of feeling of solidarity that we're all in this together and working towards one goal has been really reaffirming for me. In terms of kind of practical advice, the first thing I'd say is, like I said, just start and just get going. That's something you won't. Getting involved in activism is not something that anyone will regret, because for me, even if you change one person's mind, or you've garnered one petition on a signature on a petition, that's success and that's change, and it's valuable. But I think once you've started keeping up that momentum and keeping up the perseverance, keeping going can be really difficult. And in those situations when I was coming back from school and exhausted and having to do exams, but also having to keep up with the campaign, I kind of reminded myself of why I started, and the fact that period poverty and the injustice of it and the kind of gendered injustice of it is what made me so angry in the first place and what drove me to start. So I kind of reminded myself of that and looked over the kind of emails and social media messages that I've received from girls around the world who say that they're suffering from period poverty and that the campaign gives them hope that there'll be change one day. And that for me, again, was really reaffirming. The other advice is kind of a lot of the time I would feel really disheartened by emailing my own local MP 6 or 7 times and getting no response, or having a meeting with a politician in Parliament and it feeling really productive and they seem really interested, but then, you know, you never hear back from them again. And all these things where you're just going and going and going and you're saying the same thing and you're trying to convince people and change people's minds, but they're just not listening, and it seems hopeless. And in those situations, I think you need the affirmation from people online. You need the kind of the strength that you find in numbers and in the community of people who are willing to do the work with you. So you're not in this alone, and you're kind of building up everyone's resources and everyone's skills to create a collective movement. So also just be really shameless. That's always my advice to people.
I love that. Absolutely. Thank you.
It can be really embarrassing, but actually it's so valuable to just kind of email the same person 3 times, because so often, you know, everyone's busy and everyone wants to help, but just kind of rinse all your contacts.
Thank you, Amika. No, I think this is exactly it. You know, it's just shameless. I love it. I'm definitely going to add that to my top tip. Soraya, what about you?
So I would reinforce that. I think that this work can be it's very emotionally taxing. It's exhausting. It can be quite re-traumatizing or traumatizing if you're not aware that there's secondary trauma that you can experience just by talking to and working with people who have trauma, right? I mean, we all have experiences in our own past, but if you're working closely, and very often this kind of work is directly related to trauma in society. And so being able to recognize what's happening in the moment to yourself or to others and take a step back. I would say that one of the strongest ways to build resilience and a sort of a long-term commitment to this work, which I think if you're like any of us here, I believe that this is not something you put on and take off in different spaces. This is who I am. And I kind of laugh because I think, well, you know, you need to find that community of people, and it can be that they are not physically with you. They're just not there around you necessarily, you know, and some of us are lucky enough that our families will support us, but many of us aren't. And so what do you do when that's the case? And you can always find people who are like-minded. It's just the fact. But I will say that you do need like an inner core of people when you feel like you're losing your mind, when you're facing incredible harassment or some intractable political obstacle. You have to have those people that you trust and that you can work with. I also think you have to be very strategic and work in alliances. In some cases, you might be the inside player, but you might be the outside player in another case. If you can strategize with allies in that way and have shared objectives, I think it's extremely important. And that also allows people to take a step back sometimes, not always have to be in the forefront of what's happening, to catch your breath, to think more clearly. And then the last thing I would say is you really, I think, have to be very uncomfortable, be very comfortable with other people's discomfort. You have to have your own discomfort, because I can't think of a context in which I don't learn something new or am aware of what I'm missing, or thinking about how, you know, my standpoint is very different from someone else's, and what does that mean to us. But I do think that being able to pick your battles is very important, to know which people are never going to budge and why it doesn't make any sense to spend time and energy and effort on those people. But that's different from the discomfort. I mean, I think a lot about social occasions. If you're like at a party and you start talking about, you know, white hetero patriarchal capitalism, it gets really quiet really fast.
Can I come next time, please?
Yeah, please, right? Like you start saying those things because you're bored or you're frustrated or someone's just said something really asinine, and you can just see the entire space around you go, what just happened? And so I think, you know, context matters and language matters. But yeah, I would say all of those things.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Soraya. I that really resonated. Thank you so much. Martha, also, I just wanted to explain, so I think the producers are muting you when we're not speaking because we're getting some echo. That's not because we don't want to have the most lively conversation, but that's really what's happening. But I would like Martha to be unmuted now because I would love to hear from Martha. And also, Martha, there's a question that's come in. So if you could give us the top tips that you would give to yourself, and then maybe if you can answer the question. This is from Jude Wanga, a wonderful woman who's also one of our ambassadors, and she asks, if in your work with Charities So Wide, what obstacles have you faced getting NGOs and charities to recognize how race and racism impacts their work, and have you found it frustrating?
Oh gosh. Okay, let me start with my top tips, or what I would say to myself. I think, yeah, it was mentioned, the emotional toll of things. So I think it's actually really important to have fun with it. Have fun with your activism. The thing I like about Charity So Wide, it is a collective of young-ish, mainly women of colour, and we all like each other. We all have a lot of fun. Our Slack channel is popping constantly with hilarious jokes, and we make sure that we look after each other. Because doing this work alone is exhausting, especially right now. Working in anti-racism, it's relentless. You know, the requests that you're getting, the kind of trauma that you're seeing, and having to kind of, you know, relive that on a daily basis every time you go on Twitter. I feel like I get re-traumatized. So making sure that you make that space for joy and laughter, and it helps you to bring people along. Really, if you're, I don't want to say that we're trying to be welcoming, because we're not. We're sassy. We will come after you on Twitter if we think that that's going to be what needs to happen coming after a funder in order to get our aims for, you know, equitable distribution of funding. But you need that joy too, otherwise you're just going to alienate everybody. Another tip, I think, is playing to your strengths. This is David and Goliath here that's happening. We're small people going up against giants, trying to change institutional frameworks and dismantle the status quo. That is really, really difficult if you're trying to play your opponent at their own game, I guess. Something I like about Charity So Wide is that we are on the outside. We aren't kind of part of an organization, which means that we're able to say what we want to say, what we need to say. We use Twitter effectively. We use shame effectively. We will shame organizations. We'll embarrass them. We will become a PR nightmare for organizations that we think are not stepping up when it comes to racial justice. So playing to your strengths and recognizing that actually, if you're trying to dismantle an institution, you cannot do it by playing by the rules of that institution, because you will not win. Or what will happen is your goals will become kind of submerged into that institution and will weaken what you're trying to achieve. Something else that I think is really important about your kind of point of when people look at activists and say, how could I possibly do that? I mean, I see myself as a normal person. I'm a bit of a joker, a bit of a loser in my mind. But I went to see Angela Davis talk at Women of the Wild Festival. She's my hero. And I was in the same room as her. And I was like, oh my God, this is a person. She's just a person. And she would talk to me. And that really made me kind of think, actually, like, anybody can do this. Everybody should do this, really.
I really love that. I just have to quickly come in, because I think this is one of the most important things that I had to learn the hard way, that we're not doing anyone any favor if we put people, women, whoever, on a pedestal, isn't it? I mean, we're not doing them a favor because the only way is down, and we're not doing ourselves a favor because we're not connecting. We're not kind of seeing that actually that they've also had their journey, and if they did it, we can too. So yeah, I really love that. And Martha, do you want to say something about the question?
Oh, the question. Yeah. That is a funny question. Yes, it is frustrating. Yes, I have encountered many obstacles. It's the first hurdle that is actually quite hard to get past, which is to say the word racism. For an organization to say there is institutional racism in my organization, which is one of our calls to action. Our calls to action is have candid and critical conversations, seek public accountability, and prioritize the work. And that public accountability, we're basically asking leaders to make a statement saying there is institutional racism in my organization. This is what I'm going to do about it. Getting to that hurdle has been tough. And it comes down to an incomplete understanding of what racism is. And ultimately that discomfort that we've been speaking about before. And I think Ali mentioned it previously really well in that, I've written about discomfort and the privilege of comfort, because to be able to pick and choose when you're going to be comfortable, that is a privilege that's afforded to the oppressor. So, people of color, people who are oppressed, women of color, we have to live with this discomfort on a daily basis. We don't get to pick and choose. So kind of looking at it that way, being very clear about the fact that it's going to be uncomfortable, and be very clear about the fact that people don't understand what racism is. They think of it as an interpersonal or ideological framework when they're not looking at the institutional. And the institutional is kind of where Charity So White sits. We're trying to dismantle those institutions that stop people of color from being able to fully participate in meaningful conversations about their lives. Yeah, and yes, it is frustrating.
Yeah, exactly. This is amazing. Okay, I'm just checking if there's any other questions, but they haven't. Okay, so we've got a few minutes, and I just wondered whether you can share any resources that have helped you in your activism, because this is also about building our toolkit. And I know, I'm just talking about several books already throughout the day that have helped me so enormously. So yeah, Soraya, you were nodding. Do you have any resources that really helped you?
So two things occur to me. One is that there's virtually nothing that's new. And I think a lot of people, when they start, the issues that we encounter may be new to us, but in fact, they're almost always brilliant people that have thought about this work before. So I think of the rest of the activist world as an open resource. And I too am shameless and persistent. I will call anybody on the planet. I will reach out to them. I will continue until I hear back from them. If somebody says go away, I will go away. But if they don't say go away, I will stay and keep coming back. So we don't have a lot of money often. We don't have a lot of resources. What we have is time and energy and rage, or however you want to categorize that energy. But I would say that really pick up your device of choice or your communication of choice and give yourself a chance to find those experts and those people. The second thing is, especially in this moment, while people are sort of having this global consciousness raising around racial injustice, I think that a lot of people with resources want to help. But their inclination is going to be to set up a new organization, start something new. And I cannot stress this enough. If you are among those people that has those resources, give them to the people who have been working for so long to do the work. Find those people, shift the wealth and the resources into those hands, because it's just very important not to go to slow things down or move backwards by assuming that you have some brilliant new idea about how to fight racism or fight intersectional oppression of any kind. So those are just resources. I'm like, resources are out here.
Absolutely, they are. Thank you. Yeah. Thank you so much, Soraya. Okay, we have 1 minute. Okay, so super quickly. Amika, one thing, one resource.
Oh my God. Okay, I'm going to just cram in. Social media generally at the moment, I think, is completely transformed. We're all talking about racial injustice, and I think people feel like that's the hub. If you want to find out, if you just want to enter anti-racism work, that's where to go. So I would say go on your Instagram, speak.
Yes.
And I'll take really quickly, I'll be 10 seconds. Is that
Thank you.
I'm writing a book about activism later in the year with very practical steps on how to start a campaign. So if you want to check that out, please do.
We shall look forward to that, Amika. Thank you. And Martha?
I would say Charity Stay White's website, plug my own organisation, and All About Love by Bell Hooks. I think that's a really good book to think about community and love, even though it's cheesy.
It's not cheesy. No, it's revolutionary.
It is.
Okay, how can I thank you? You've been absolutely incredible. You have fired me up. I can not even imagine what the audience must be feeling right now. Thank you so much, Martha. Thank you, Amika. Thank you, Soraya. I love you all. And I hope that we can stay in touch and we can do this again soon. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye, everyone.
Well, hallelujah. I mean, was that great or was that great? I mean, can I just say how hard it is to have to cut incredible women like that short? I mean, really, really not easy. But I've done it for the sake of running on time. So I hope that our producers are happy.